Hi guys, my name is Brittany Slater from Speak Teasy. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist with a specialization in sex therapy. And today we're going to be talking about how to unlock passion in your relationship. Now, my guess is if you found your way to this video, you're looking for some tips and tricks on how to spice things up in the bedroom. And that's a great idea, but most couples come to me and when they want to work on their intimacy in their relationship and they say, okay, how do we spice things up in the bedroom? How can we get more physical with each other? And that is a great goal, but I tell most of my couples, hey, that is your end goal. There's actually many different types of intimacy in a relationship, and if you work on all of them at once, you're going to have a more organic and pleasurable connection with each other. So what do I mean by that? So there are actually 4 different types of intimacy. They're emotional, intellectual, experiential, and then finally physical. So to give you a little bit more background on those, pretty self-explanatory, but one of the most important ones is emotional intimacy. Think of this as really the foundation to the rest of your relationship. Emotional intimacy is when you have the freedom and the comfortability level to share your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, which is very important for physical intimacy, with one another, right? It's that person that you really feel close with, you feel comfortable with, and you can trust. The second type of intimacy is intellectual intimacy. This is where couples can feel free to debate ideas with one another. They can share their viewpoints on different things. It's really when you get stimulated essentially by the intellect of the other person. Now, this is really important, again, for physical intimacy because you need to generate heat in your relationship, right? You need a little passion, and things like emotional intimacy can create kind of all those feel-good chemicals, but it's really the intellectual intimacy that can generate a little bit more of that fire with one another, a little bit more of that, we're kind of sparring back and forth and we're sort of turned on by how the other person thinks and how they view things, right? So that's why intellectual intimacy can be really important. Now, there's a third type of intimacy, and I like to call this the fun side of intimacy, which is experiential. And this is essentially when couples have experiences together, right? It's the couples that are spending intentional quality time with each other. They're experiencing life together, they're making memories, they're doing new activities, they're doing hobbies together. And again, this is really essential because when you're in a long-term relationship, it can be very common to just get in sort of a routine. Maybe you're just sitting on the couch every night watching TV, and that is all fine, but you really need to add in experiential intimacy in order to spice things up. You can't just be sitting around doing the same old thing every day. You need to have that exciting adventure aspect with your partner. So going out, doing hobbies, things like that. And then, of course, the last one is physical intimacy, which, like I said, is sort of the cherry on top of the rest of the intimacy sundae. And that one's a little bit more obvious. It's the sexual chemistry between two couples, how you flirt with one another, and how you're attracted to one another. So those are all the different types of intimacy. And the natural follow-up question to this is, okay, well, how do we do that? So there are a couple different things that I advise my couples to do. And again, where I said that emotional intimacy is the sort of bedrock to the rest of your relationship foundation, there are actually 3 things that I advise you to do, and actually 3 things in each category. But for emotional, one of the most important things you can do is practice active listening. So active listening is essentially where you're engaged with the other person, you're making eye contact, you're asking questions about what they're talking about. Essentially, you are paying attention. You are not just passively listening and kind of nodding your head and saying yes. You're really engaged with them. You're interested in what they have to say, and you're letting the other person know that, right? Your phone is down. You're not looking around. You're not doing other things. Active listening is going to help your partner feel that you are interested in what they have to say, and it's going to create more of a connection. The second thing you want to do with emotional intimacy is to have frequent check-ins with one another. This can be something as simple as, hey, tell me about your day, get really in depth with it, but it's really having that check-in on, again, that emotional level. Sometimes it can be a little bit more in depth, like, hey, I'm noticing you're struggling with this. How is this going? It can look something like, is there anything in our relationship that you feel you could use more support with, or that you feel is really going well that you want more of? I know those questions can seem, a little silly, maybe even a little awkward, but again, my couples that regularly check in with each other, they have that opportunity to open up conversations that might not otherwise be opened, and it's going to create a greater degree of intimacy. And one of the last things you can do for emotional intimacy is to create shared experiences and talk about them. So, this can be things like talking about what's challenging at work. Are there family dynamics you're dealing with that both affect the two of you? Kids can be a really big one for a lot of couples. Really having that open and honest communication around what is going on in our lives, how is it affecting the both of us, and how are we sharing in that experience? What are we both feeling from life right now? How are we getting through it together? All of these things. Essentially, emotional intimacy is having open and honest communication, and when you can really build that with each other, you are going to feel closer, and these other aspects of intimacy, especially physical intimacy, are going to feel much better. So, intellectual intimacy, something not as many couples pay as much attention to, but can happen naturally between people. But intellectual intimacy, again, you really want to be having kind of that stimulating conversation, not the same old every day. Again, the shared experience is one with emotional intimacy is good, but this is where you can draw it out a little bit further, kind of have more of those in-depth questions with each other. So one technique I like to use to stimulate intellectual intimacy is a questions game. So this is essentially, honestly, you can go on Google, you can look up, different relationship questions, things like that. But it's essentially where you pick one question a week to debate and discuss with one another. It can be something as silly and as simple as, hey, what's your favorite childhood memory and why? It could be something really in depth, like, if you could change one U.S. policy, what would you change and why? It's essentially just questions to sort of simulate each other, get you talking outside of your normal box of what you would talk about in the week to week with one another. And again, this can help draw out different viewpoints, help you feel connected, help you understand one another in a deeper way, which obviously is going to create intimacy. Intellectual intimacy can also be really stimulated by intentional quality time. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but it's really important to have intentional quality time. And I say intentional because a lot of couples that I see do spend a lot of time together, but it's unintentional time, right? It's where they're doing other things. They're not necessarily paying attention to one another, and they're not creating that intensity with one another that helps you feel that closeness and helps you feel that intimacy. So intentional quality time should be happening ideally 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how busy you are. More if you can, maybe a little less if you're in a stressful life phase, maybe it's once a week. But it's essentially where you're not really focusing on anything else but each other. You're putting your phones down, you don't have other distractions going on, and you're just spending that time just engaging with one another, whether it's talking. I say to some couples, if it's watching a show or watching TV, that is fine, but just making sure that you're doing it intentionally. Maybe you're cuddling, maybe you're pausing the show to talk about what you're seeing on the screen, what you think, all of that. Again, it's more than just sitting together, it's more than just being in the same room, it's really being intentional. And for my couples that are really stimulated by intellect, this is one that they tend to love, and I think is really good for a lot of couples, which is to read and to listen together. So a lot of people throughout their day, they're listening to podcasts, they're reading interesting articles, it might be sparking some thoughts they have, and who better to share that with than the person you love, right? So if you have a podcast episode you find really interesting, or an article or a book you're reading, share that with your partner. Listen to it together, discuss what you're feeling, thinking, share with one another. That, again, can be a really unique way to bring you closer together and have that intellectual stimulation with one another. Now, one of my favorite, again, is the experiential side of intimacy, and this is, again, all about having fun with each other, having experiences together. And this is where you can kind of draw on those fun date nights with each other, think a little bit outside the box and make things a little fun. Again, those fun outside the date box nights tend to be where you have better physical intimacy. So one thing I say to couples is, to create those experiences, a good thing is to recreate memories, right? Are there experiences you already have that you find positive? Recreating those with one another. Maybe you go back to the place of your first date, or think of a special moment you had together and you recreate that with one another. That can be a really fun date night for couples, and it helps bring up all those feel-good chemicals, all those feel-good memories you have that can help you grow closer together. Another aspect to experiential intimacy is have a hobby together, right? So couples that are doing things together, it's going to be another point of conversation. It's going to be something you're both passionate about, something you can share and do together. Couples who tend to have a hobby together do tend to report higher levels of relationship satisfaction. And even if it's not a joint hobby, if you both kind of have your own, try to share in that with each other. Maybe switch off, try each other's hobbies, or go watch the other person's hobbies, talk about them, have time where you can talk about both, but essentially have an activity that you are doing together. And the last one for experiential is to have an adventure date night activity. So this is something I assign couples all the time. It's actually in my sex and intimacy seminar. I go a lot more in depth into this and other ideas for intimacy. But essentially what you're going to do is once a month, or as often as you can get there, you're going to switch off planning a date. So the person who's planning the date is responsible for all aspects of it. Logistics, so if you need to get childcare, if you need to make reservations, arrange transportation, whatever it is, you take care of it nuts to bolts. And you really want to try to do something fun and exciting, maybe, again, a little bit outside the box, something you haven't done before, something to make it special or make an aspect of it special, right? So if it's like, okay, we go to this restaurant, all the time, it's nothing really new, maybe have a bottle of champagne or something, waiting at the table, something that signifies something special. If you don't drink or you want to do something a little bit cheaper, planning a picnic somewhere like that, right? It doesn't have to be over the top. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but it's just something, again, getting you outside of that normal, oh, this is the same date we go on every time and it's the same script, just doing something a little unique with it. And then the following month you switch, right? So you go back and forth, and the goal is to essentially keep each other on your toes, really be looking forward to a date with one another, and it's going to create that excitement, which excitement is crucial to the last type of intimacy, which is physical intimacy. Now, again, this is probably what everyone's waiting for. In terms of physical intimacy, how do you make that a little hotter? How do you make that a little more passionate? I can't stress enough, if you work on those other 3 types of intimacy, you're probably going to naturally find that your physical intimacy gets a little bit better. But in terms of how to, once you get there and actually enhance your physical intimacy, one very important thing is to prioritize affection, right? So if you want to be sexy with one another, if you want to be passionate, that shouldn't just be something that's happening inside the bedroom. Every day you should be showing your partner some type of affection, whether it's a hug, whether it's a caress, it's a compliment, whatever you and your partner are comfortable with, but it should be something that you're doing daily, not just right before you get in the bedroom. Another thing that can be really helpful for couples that are struggling with physical intimacy is to practice sensate focus, because one of the things that I see is that couples just kind of jump right in. Again, they do the same old sex script they have intimacy the same way every single time. And something that's a lot more helpful is this practice called sensate focus, which is essentially a somatic type of therapy that it experiments with touch and sensation to see what you both like. It's aimed at a little bit more of a pleasure aspect. And it's essentially experimenting with kind of slowing things down and just really absorbing that pleasure with one another. This is a little bit more of an enhanced technique. Again, it is something that I go over in my sex and intimacy seminar well in depth. So if you're interested, you can check that out at speaktz.com. But my last tip for this is essentially to make sure you're having lots and lots of foreplay. Similar to my other 2 techniques above, it is really important that you are slowing things down and not just rushing into things. On average, even the couples I see that think they're spending enough time on foreplay, they really aren't. It should be something that you are really building and heightening with each other throughout the day. And remember that for a lot of people, especially women, foreplay can be everything that happens in the 24 hours before sex. I know that sounds kind of shocking, but it really is true. The entire day before can influence how pleasurable a experience is for you. So again, make sure that you are being mentally stimulated, you're being emotionally stimulated, and then when it comes to physical, make sure you are being physically stimulated. Don't just jump right into sex trying to have an orgasm. Really slow things down, really extend out the pleasure with each other. And if you can do that, you are going to find that you are going to have greater intimacy. You're going to have a better connection if you put all of this together. So there you have it, some of my just kind of starter tips and tricks for enhancing intimacy in your relationship. Like I said, I go over all of this and more in my Couples Connected and my sex and intimacy seminars. If you want more information about those, you can always email me at speakteasyma@gmail.com. You can also check out an in-depth summary of my classes at speakteasy.com. Thanks for listening.